The morning air over Delphi carried the scent of pine trees, mountain stone, and burning incense. Pilgrims had been climbing the sacred road since before sunrise, each bringing offerings to the temple of Apollo in the hope that the god would reveal a glimpse of the future. Kings, merchants, generals, and ordinary farmers all came here for the same reason. In the ancient Greek world, no sanctuary held greater authority than Delphi. Decisions that would shape kingdoms were often made only after hearing the words spoken by the mysterious Pythia, the priestess believed to speak with the voice of Apollo himself. Among those climbing the marble steps during the late summer of 480 BC was a man who understood that his journey would likely decide the fate of his homeland. His name was Leonidas, king of Sparta. Unlike many rulers who visited Delphi seeking prosperity or victory, Leonidas already suspected the answer before he asked the question. The Persian Empire was coming, and nothing in Greek history had ever compared to the storm gathering beyond the Aegean Sea. The prophecy he received was famously cryptic, as nearly all Delphic prophecies were. Apollo offered Sparta only to possible futures. Either the city itself would be destroyed by the descendants of Perseus, or one of Sparta's kings would die. Ancient writers preserved different versions of the oracle, but they all carried the same message. The gods demanded a sacrifice. Leonidas descended the sacred mountain in silence. Whether every detail of this story happened exactly as later historians described is impossible to know. Herodotus, writing decades afterward, relied on eyewitness accounts, oral traditions, and stories passed between generations. Some details were undoubtedly embellished over time, yet one fact remains beyond dispute. Leonidas never attempted to avoid the prophecy, he accepted it. Long before a single Persian soldier reached Greece, the king had already chosen his path. To understand why one man would knowingly march toward almost certain death, it is necessary to understand the enemy advancing from the east. The Persian Empire was unlike anything the Mediterranean world had ever witnessed. Stretching from the valleys of India to the deserts of Egypt, from the mountains of Central Asia to the shores of the Aegean Sea, it controlled millions of people belonging to dozens of cultures. Hundreds of languages echoed across its provinces. Its roads stretched farther than any previous civilization had imagined possible. Royal messengers could travel astonishing distances thanks to a network of relay stations built under earlier Persian kings. Supplies, soldiers, taxes, and information flowed across continents with remarkable efficiency. This was not merely a kingdom, it was the largest empire the world had yet seen. Its ruler, Xerxes the First, inherited not only immense wealth but unfinished business. His father, Darius the Great, had attempted to punish the Greek city-states after Athens supported the Ionian revolt, an uprising by Greek colonies living under Persian rule in Asia Minor. Darius believed the rebellious cities had challenged Persian authority. Athens had dared to interfere. That insult demanded retribution. The campaign ended in disaster. At the Battle of Marathon, the heavily armored Athenian hoplites shocked the Persian army by charging directly across the battlefield. Against overwhelming expectations, the Greeks shattered the invasion force. Persian soldiers retreated to their ships, and Darius spent the remainder of his reign preparing another invasion. He never lived to see it. When Darius died, Xerxes inherited more than a throne. He inherited an empire expecting revenge. Unlike his father, Xerxes refused to think on a small scale. Everything about his invasion reflected overwhelming ambition. Engineers dug an enormous canal through the narrow neck of the Mount Athos Peninsula so the Persian fleet could avoid the dangerous waters where an earlier expedition had been wrecked by violent storms. Massive storehouses filled with grain, dried meat, wine, and weapons appeared along the invasion route months before the army even arrived. Bridges built from hundreds of ships were stretched across the Hellespont, linking Asia with Europe in one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. According to Herodotus, a violent storm destroyed the first bridges before the crossing began. The story that followed became one of history's most famous examples of royal arrogance. Enraged by the destruction, Xerxes reportedly ordered the waters of the Hellespont to be whipped with hundreds of lashes while chains were cast into the sea as punishment. Whether this happened exactly as described remains debated among historians, but the story survived because it reflected how the Greeks understood Persian kingship. Xerxes was portrayed as a ruler who believed even nature itself should obey his command. The bridges were rebuilt. This time they held. Across them marched an army unlike any Greece had ever faced. Ancient sources claimed impossible numbers, sometimes speaking of more than 1 million soldiers. Modern historians reject those figures as exaggerations caused by generations of storytelling. Careful analysis of supply requirements, road capacity, and archaeological evidence suggests a force probably numbering somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 men. accompanied by thousands of horses, servants, engineers, craftsmen, and sailors. Even the smallest modern estimate remained enormous. The Persian host included archers from Mesopotamia, cavalry from Central Asia, spearmen from Persia, Egyptian marines, Phoenician sailors, Indian warriors carrying bamboo bows, and soldiers from nearly every province of the empire. Many spoke different languages, many worshipped different gods. Some had never even seen one another before gathering beneath the banners of the great king. What united them was obedience. Where the Persian army traveled, roads disappeared beneath dust. Rivers became muddy from thousands of animals drinking at once. Villages emptied their grain stores simply to feed the passing columns. The invasion resembled a moving city more than a military expedition. Meanwhile, Greece remained deeply divided. Modern readers often imagine ancient Greece as a single nation. It was nothing of the sort. It consisted of fiercely independent city-states, each with its own government, traditions, rivalries, and ambitions. Athens valued democracy and naval power. Corinth dominated trade. Thebes frequently competed with Sparta for influence. Smaller cities worried first about surviving their neighbors before thinking about foreign invaders. Many Greeks distrusted one another more than they feared Persia. Some city-states quickly submitted to Xerxes, offering symbolic gifts of earth and water, traditional signs of surrender acknowledging Persian authority. Others hoped neutrality would spare them from destruction. A few believed resistance was hopeless. Only a fragile alliance slowly emerged. Sparta would command the land forces. Athens would command the fleet. Neither trusted the other completely. Both understood that failure meant the end of Greek independence. Sparta itself seemed an unlikely leader. Unlike Athens, it possessed few impressive buildings and little interest in monumental architecture. Foreign visitors expecting magnificent palaces instead found a city spread across several villages without defensive walls. The Spartans considered walls unnecessary. Their soldiers were expected to serve as the city's true defense. From childhood, Spartan boys entered the agoge, one of history's most demanding systems of military education. Beginning at the age of 7, they left their families and entered communal training. Hunger, exhaustion, harsh discipline, and competition became daily realities. They learned to endure pain without complaint, to obey instantly, and to place the survival of Sparta above every personal desire. Popular culture often exaggerates this system, portraying every Spartan as an unbeatable warrior. Reality was more complicated. Spartan soldiers could be defeated, and they occasionally were. Their true strength came not from superhuman abilities but from relentless discipline and extraordinary cohesion on the battlefield. Each man trusted the shield beside him. Each movement had been practiced countless times. Individual bravery mattered. Collective discipline mattered even more. Leonidas himself had experienced this education. By the time he became king, he had spent decades living according to Spartan law. Unlike Persian monarchs surrounded by luxury, Spartan kings ate alongside ordinary soldiers during campaigns. They fought in the front ranks and accepted the same dangers as every other hoplite. When reports arrived confirming the Persian advance, panic spread across much of Greece. Entire regions prepared to surrender. Others debated evacuation. Some argued resistance was simply impossible. Yet geography offered one final opportunity. Northern Greece could not easily be crossed by such an enormous army. Between steep mountains and the waters of the Malian Gulf lay a narrow coastal passage known as Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, named after the natural sulfur springs rising from the earth nearby. In some places, the passage narrowed so dramatically that only a limited number of soldiers could fight side by side. If any location could neutralize Persia's overwhelming numbers, this was it. But there was a problem. Sparta was celebrating the Carnia, one of its most sacred religious festivals dedicated to Apollo. Spartan law forbade launching major military campaigns while the festival continued. Religious obligations carried enormous authority in Spartan society. Ignoring them was almost unthinkable. The Persian army would not wait. Spartan leaders faced an impossible decision: break sacred law, or abandon Greece before the campaign had even begun. The compromise they reached would become one of history's most enduring military legends. Rather than mobilizing the full Spartan army immediately, Leonidas would lead an advance force north while the rest prepared to follow once the religious observances had ended. Before departing, he made one final decision that later generations never forgot. He carefully selected only 300 Spartan citizens. According to Herodotus, every man chosen already had living sons. This detail was no accident. If the worst happened, each family line would survive. The selection carried an unspoken message understood by every warrior standing before their king. They were not marching toward glory, they were marching toward a future few of them expected to see. Leonidas and his chosen warriors left Sparta beneath the burning sun of late summer, their bronze shields catching flashes of light with every step. There were no grand celebrations and no triumphant crowds cheering their departure. The mood was solemn. Everyone understood that this was not an ordinary military expedition. It was a desperate attempt to delay the most powerful empire on earth long enough for the rest of Greece to prepare. The journey north covered more than 100 kilometers across rough valleys, rocky hills, fertile plains, and narrow mountain roads. Along the way, messengers raced ahead, informing other Greek cities that the Spartans were coming. One by one, allies joined Leonidas. Men from Corinth marched beside Arcadians carrying long spears polished for battle. Phocians familiar with the surrounding mountains arrived with valuable knowledge of the terrain. Locrians, Mycenaeans, Thespians, and warriors from several other cities also answered the call. Contrary to popular belief, the famous 300 Spartans never intended to fight alone. By the time the Greek army reached Thermopylae, more than 7,000 soldiers stood together beneath dozens of different city banners. They spoke with different accents, followed different local customs, and often competed with one another during times of peace. Yet now they faced a common enemy whose ambitions threatened every independent city in Greece. Many historians believe that the alliance itself was almost as remarkable as the battle that followed. Greek city-states rarely cooperated for long. Rivalries that had lasted generations could easily destroy military alliances before a campaign even began. Athens and Sparta distrusted one another deeply. Corinth competed fiercely for influence. Thebes often pursued its own interests. Despite these divisions, the invasion forced them to think beyond local politics. If Persia conquered Greece one city at a time, none would survive alone. As Leonidas approached Thermopylae, he inspected the landscape with the eye of an experienced commander. Ancient warfare depended as much upon geography as courage. A battlefield could decide the outcome before the first spear was thrown. The pass at Thermopylae appeared almost insignificant compared with the Great Plains where many famous battles had been fought. Towering limestone cliffs rose sharply on one side, while the waters of the Malian Gulf pressed close against the other. Earthquakes and changing coastlines have altered the area over the centuries, making it much wider today than it was in antiquity. During Leonidas' lifetime, however, parts of the passage narrowed dramatically. In certain places, only a relatively small number of soldiers could stand shoulder to shoulder. That changed everything. Persia possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. Thermopylae denied Persia the ability to use it. Even if hundreds of thousands of soldiers waited behind the front line, only a limited number could attack at any given moment. The rest would simply stand idle, trapped behind their own comrades. Leonidas immediately ordered his men to strengthen an old defensive wall that earlier Greeks had built across the narrowest section of the pass. Stones were repaired, gaps were filled, and the position became the center of the Greek defense. Behind this barrier stood hoplites carrying massive round shields made primarily of wood reinforced with bronze. Each shield weighed several kilograms and protected not only its owner but also the men standing beside him. The Greek army depended upon formation rather than individual heroics. Every soldier's shield overlapped with the next, every spear projected forward through carefully organized ranks. Breaking formation endangered everyone. Holding formation meant survival. Unlike later medieval knights, Greek hoplites were citizen soldiers. Farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and landowners all fought together when their cities called. Most purchased their own armor, making equipment a sign of both military readiness and personal wealth. A complete set included a bronze helmet, body armor, greaves protecting the lower legs, a large shield, a long spear, and a short sword used only if the spear broke during combat. Spartan equipment looked similar to that of other Greek hoplites, but years of relentless training allowed Spartan formations to maneuver with extraordinary precision. Ancient writers repeatedly praised their discipline rather than their physical strength. They could advance, retreat, rotate exhausted front ranks, and maintain cohesion under enormous pressure. Their greatest weapon was not bronze, it was trust. Meanwhile, far to the north, Xerxes continued leading one of history's largest military expeditions toward the Greek frontier. The Persian camp stretched across the countryside for astonishing distances. Tens of thousands of tents covered fields and hillsides. Horses, camels, pack animals, engineers, physicians, priests, cooks, blacksmiths, and servants traveled alongside the soldiers. Supply wagons carried grain, dried fruit, salted meat, arrows, spare weapons, and construction materials. Maintaining such an enormous force required planning on a scale almost unimaginable in the ancient world. Recent archaeological research has highlighted the extraordinary logistical capabilities of the Achaemenid Empire. Persian administrators prepared the invasion months in advance, establishing supply depots, repairing roads, gathering ships, and coordinating contributions from dozens of provinces. Contrary to older stereotypes portraying Persia as merely a vast barbarian horde, modern historians recognize it as one of the most sophisticated administrative states of antiquity. Its armies were organized, its engineers were highly skilled, its commanders possessed decades of experience. The Greeks were not facing chaos, they were facing one of history's greatest superpowers. When Xerxes finally reached Thermopylae, he expected another easy surrender. Many Greek cities had already submitted peacefully, others had fled before his arrival. The great king assumed the defenders would eventually recognize the hopelessness of resistance. Instead, he found a handful of warriors calmly waiting. According to Herodotus, Xerxes initially delayed his attack for several days. He believed the Greeks would abandon the pass once they fully appreciated the size of the Persian army. His scouts reported strange behavior inside the Greek camp. Rather than displaying fear, many Spartans appeared completely relaxed. Some exercised, others talked quietly, several carefully combed their long hair. To outsiders, this seemed absurd. Among Spartans, however, preparing one's appearance before battle carried deep symbolic meaning. Warriors often arranged their hair before facing death, treating the coming fight with dignity rather than panic. The Persian king reportedly asked Demaratus, an exiled Spartan king who now advised the Persian court, why these men behaved so strangely. Demaratus answered with remarkable confidence, "When Spartans prepare their hair," he explained, "they are preparing to risk their lives." Xerxes left. He believed no force so small could seriously resist his empire. Hoping to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, the Persian king sent an envoy demanding surrender. The message was simple: lay down your weapons, submit peacefully, and your lives would be spared. Leonidas replied with words that would echo across history, "Come and take them." In Greek, the phrase was molon labe, only 2 words. Yet they became one of the most famous declarations of defiance ever recorded. Whether Leonidas spoke those exact words cannot be proven with certainty, but the phrase appeared in ancient sources soon after the battle and became inseparable from the Spartan legend. Even today it continues to symbolize resistance against overwhelming odds. Days passed, neither side moved. The silence itself became a weapon. Greek soldiers watched enormous clouds of Persian dust rise beyond the horizon as more units continued. Arriving, every sunrise revealed fresh banners, additional cavalry, and endless ranks of infantry. The sheer scale of the invasion impressed even experienced warriors. Still they remained. Leonidas understood something that many later observers overlooked. His objective was never to destroy the Persian army. That was impossible. His mission was to delay it. Every additional day allowed southern Greece to strengthen its defenses. More cities could organize their militias. More civilians could evacuate. The Greek fleet could prepare its own defensive operations near Artemisium, where naval forces hoped to mirror Leonidas' strategy by forcing the Persian navy into narrow waters. Land and sea were working together. If either defense collapsed too quickly, the other would become almost impossible to maintain. Finally, after waiting several days, Xerxes lost patience. Confident that overwhelming numbers would sweep aside the defenders within hours, he ordered his first assault. Thousands of Persian infantry advanced toward the narrow entrance of the hot gates. They expected frightened farmers. Instead they found one of the most disciplined battle formations the ancient world had ever produced. The greatest test of Spartan courage was about to begin. The first light of dawn crept across the cliffs of Thermopylae, casting long shadows over the narrow strip of land where the fate of Greece was about to be tested. A cool breeze drifted in from the Malian Gulf, carrying the smell of saltwater and sulfur from the hot springs that had given the pass its name centuries before. The Greek soldiers stood silently behind their shields. Some whispered brief prayers to the gods. Others tightened the leather straps on their bronze armor or adjusted the grip on their long spears. No speeches were necessary. Every man already understood his duty. Across the plain, the Persian camp was awakening. Trumpets echoed through the morning air as officers barked commands in dozens of different languages. Thousands of soldiers poured into formation while cavalry officers organized their horses and engineers cleared the roads for the advancing columns. The rising sun reflected from countless bronze helmets, polished spearheads, and decorated shields until the horizon itself seemed to shimmer with metal. Xerxes watched from an elevated throne placed where he could observe the entire battlefield. According to Herodotus, the great king believed the Greeks would finally lose their nerve once they witnessed the full strength of his army assembling before them. They did not move. Their shields remained locked together. Their line never wavered. Confident that victory would come quickly, Xerxes ordered his first wave forward. The opening assault consisted primarily of Medes and Scythians, experienced soldiers who had fought throughout the empire. They advanced with confidence, expecting the defenders to collapse beneath overwhelming numbers. Instead, they encountered something entirely different: the Greek phalanx. To modern eyes, it might appear to be nothing more than a line of men carrying shields and spears. In reality, it was one of the most effective military formations ever developed before the age of gunpowder. Each hoplite stood close enough that his shield protected both himself and the warrior beside him. Spears projected outward in overlapping rows, creating a deadly wall of sharpened points. Men in the front rank attacked while those behind supported them, pushing the entire formation forward with steady pressure. Every movement depended upon discipline rather than individual bravery. The phalanx behaved almost like a single living creature. If one soldier stepped out of line, the entire formation became vulnerable. If everyone moved together, almost nothing could break it. The Persian infantry rushed into the narrow corridor expecting to overwhelm the defenders through sheer momentum. Instead, they crashed into a wall of bronze. Long Greek spears struck first, reaching the Persian front ranks before shorter Persian weapons could respond. Shields slammed together with deafening force. Spears splintered against armor. Men stumbled over the bodies of those who had fallen moments earlier. The confined landscape quickly became the Greeks' greatest ally. Thousands of Persian soldiers waited impatiently behind the front ranks, unable to fight because there simply was not enough room. Every additional man added pressure from behind without increasing the number of weapons reaching the enemy. What should have been an overwhelming advantage became a crushing disadvantage. Persian officers repeatedly urged their soldiers forward. Again and again they attacked. Again and again they failed. Greek discipline proved decisive. Whenever the man standing in the front became exhausted, they withdrew in perfect order while fresh warriors stepped seamlessly into their place. There was no panic, no confusion, and almost no interruption in the line. Years of relentless training allowed the Spartans and their allies to perform these rotations with remarkable precision. The Persian soldiers had never encountered anything quite like it. To many of them, the defenders appeared almost mechanical. No matter how fiercely they attacked, the bronze wall refused to break. Herodotus later claimed that Xerxes rose repeatedly from his throne during the fighting, unable to believe what he was witnessing. Although ancient historians often included dramatic details to emphasize important moments, modern scholars agree that the Persian king almost certainly recognized something had gone terribly wrong. His numerical superiority meant very little inside the narrow pass. The battle continued for hours. The ground became slick with blood and churned into thick mud beneath thousands of sandaled feet. Broken spear shafts littered the battlefield, arrows filled the air, but the confined terrain limited their effectiveness. Persian archers could not simply unleash endless volleys without striking their own soldiers engaged at the front. This surprised many later generations. Popular films often portray Persian arrows darkening the sky continuously throughout the battle. Historical reality was more complicated. Ancient archers required clear lines of fire. At Thermopylae, dense formations and restricted space reduced many of their usual advantages. As casualties mounted, the Persian assault finally faltered. The surviving attackers withdrew. The Greeks remained standing. For the first time in years, an army of the great king had been stopped. Xerxes refused to believe the setback represented anything more than temporary resistance. Surely his finest soldiers would succeed where ordinary infantry had failed. He summoned the Immortals. Among all Persian military units, none possessed a greater reputation. The Immortals formed the elite guard of the empire, numbering approximately 10,000 professional soldiers. Their famous name came from a simple but effective system. Whenever one warrior died, another immediately took his place, ensuring the unit always maintained the same strength. To foreign observers, the formation appeared impossible to diminish. Their equipment differed significantly from that of the Greek hoplites. They carried wicker shields that were lighter and easier to maneuver but offered less protection than the massive bronze-faced Greek shields. Many fought with shorter spears or thrusting lances alongside bows and swords, making them highly versatile during open battles across the vast plains of Asia. Thermopylae was not an open plain. It was exactly the kind of battlefield that neutralized many of their advantages. The Immortals advanced with confidence born from years of victory. They expected another swift campaign. Instead, they encountered the same unyielding wall that had shattered the earlier assaults. Every attempt to force the Greek line ended with more Persian casualties. The longer the fighting continued, the more exhausted the attackers became. Greek soldiers benefited from carefully organized rotations. Persian troops remained trapped at the front, pressed forward by thousands of comrades behind them with little opportunity to rest. Bronze helmets rang beneath sword blows, spears pierced linen armor. War cries echoed between the cliffs until they blended into a single continuous roar. Still the line held. The Spartans demonstrated one of their most effective battlefield techniques. Occasionally they pretended to retreat. The maneuver appeared convincing enough that Persian soldiers rushed forward in pursuit, believing the defenders had finally broken. Then, at precisely the right moment, the Greeks halted, turned together, and launched a coordinated counterattack. Persian formations, now disorganized by the pursuit, suddenly found themselves facing a perfectly ordered wall of shields once again. The losses were devastating. Historians debate exactly how often this tactic was employed, but ancient accounts consistently describe Spartan discipline creating opportunities that less experienced armies could never have exploited. By sunset, the battlefield had become a grim landscape of shattered weapons and fallen men. Thousands of Persian soldiers had attacked, the Greeks still controlled the pass. As darkness settled across Thermopylae, both armies withdrew to their camps. The Persian camp, usually filled with confidence after victory, had grown unusually quiet. Officers attempted to reorganize battered units while physicians worked without rest, treating wounded soldiers beneath flickering torchlight. Messengers hurried between commanders carrying reports that became increasingly difficult to explain. How could the greatest army in the known world fail against so few defenders? Inside the Greek camp, there was no celebration. Leonidas understood that tactical success did not mean strategic victory. Every casualty weakened his already tiny force. The Persians could replace thousands of dead soldiers. The Greeks could not. He gathered the allied commanders and discussed the next day's defense. Supplies were checked carefully, damaged armor was repaired as best it could be. Spears broken during the fighting were replaced from limited reserves. Those beyond repair forced their owners to rely upon shorter weapons if another spear could not be found. Sleep came only in brief moments. Most soldiers knew that the next day would bring an even greater assault. They were right. With the rising sun, Xerxes prepared to throw even more of his army against the defenders. The second day of battle would prove every bit as brutal as the first. Yet despite all his power, the Persian king still had no idea that the greatest threat to the Greeks was no longer standing in front of them. It was quietly making its way through the mountains behind them. Night settled over Thermopylae beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars, but neither army truly rested. Fires burned across the Persian camp as physicians moved from one wounded soldier to another, while officers struggled to explain the impossible. For 2 full days, the greatest military force in the known world had failed to break through a narrow strip of land defended by only a few thousand Greeks. In the Greek camp, there was little celebration. The defenders had one precious time, but every man understood that time alone could not defeat the Persian Empire. Spears had splintered, shields bore deep scars from countless blows. Many warriors fought through wounds that would have forced ordinary soldiers to abandon the battlefield. Food and water were carefully rationed, and every commander knew that if the Persians found another way around the pass, everything would change. Leonidas remained calm. He had not expected an easy victory. He had expected exactly what had happened: a delay. Every sunrise that Greece remained free gave the southern cities another chance to prepare. Athens continued strengthening its fleet, while messengers carried news of the stubborn resistance throughout the Greek world. Stories spread faster than armies. Farmers, merchants, sailors, and city leaders all began hearing about a tiny force that had stopped the seemingly unstoppable Persian advance. Unknown to the Greeks, however, events were already unfolding that would decide the battle. Late that night, a local man entered the Persian camp. His name was Ephialtes. Unlike many figures remembered throughout history, Ephialtes was neither a great warrior nor an influential politician. He was an ordinary Greek from the region surrounding Thermopylae who knew the mountains better than almost anyone else. Knowledge can become as valuable as an army. Ephialtes offered Xerxes something no amount of military strength could provide. He knew of a narrow mountain trail called Thermopylae. The winding path climbed high above the cliffs before descending behind the Greek position. Local shepherds and hunters had used it for generations. Leonidas was aware of its existence and had stationed approximately 1,000 Phocian soldiers there to guard the route. Yet the trail stretched through difficult terrain covered with dense woodland, making it challenging to defend against a determined force. Why Ephialtes betrayed his fellow Greeks has been debated for centuries. Ancient sources suggest that money was his primary motivation. Xerxes rewarded those who served the empire well, and Ephialtes believed revealing the hidden path would earn him wealth and status. His decision guaranteed something very different. His name became synonymous with betrayal. Even today, in modern Greek, variations of his name remain associated with nightmares and treachery. a reminder of how deeply his actions scarred Greek memory. Xerxes immediately recognized the opportunity before him. If his soldiers could reach the rear of the Greek line, Leonidas would become trapped between two armies with no avenue of escape. The Persian king selected the Immortals for the mission. Guided by Ephialtes beneath the cover of darkness, thousands of elite Persian soldiers began climbing the mountain path. The ascent was slow and exhausting. Loose stones shifted beneath their feet. Branches scraped against shields and helmets. The forest muffled the sound of thousands of footsteps, allowing the column to move almost unnoticed through the darkness. Shortly before dawn, the Phocian sentries heard an unfamiliar sound. Not voices, not marching. The quiet crackling of leaves beneath hundreds of advancing feet. Startled, the Phocians rushed to form a defensive line. Ancient accounts describe a brief exchange of arrows before the Persian force continued its advance without stopping to destroy them. Their mission was not to fight unnecessary battles. Their objective lay farther ahead. Word reached Leonidas before sunrise. The king gathered the Greek commanders for what would become their final council of war. The situation was now clear. The Persians would soon attack from both the front and the rear. The pass could no longer be defended. Many later legends portray every Greek remaining until the very end. History tells a more complicated story. Leonidas ordered most of the allied contingents to withdraw while there was still time. Some obeyed his command. Others may have departed on their own after learning that the position had become hopeless. This decision was not cowardice, it was strategy. Dead soldiers could defend nothing. Living soldiers could continue the war. Thousands of Greeks escaped Thermopylae that morning because Leonidas understood that Greece would need every experienced warrior in the battle still to come. Yet not everyone left. The 300 Spartans remained. So did approximately 700 Thespians under their commander Demophilus. Unlike Sparta, Thespiae stood directly in the path of the advancing Persians. Many of these men understood that even if they returned home, destruction would soon follow. They chose to stay. A smaller force of Thebans also remained, although historians continue debating whether they stayed voluntarily or under Leonidas' orders. Whatever their reasons, they too became part of the final stand. As dawn illuminated the mountains, Xerxes launched the attack he had been waiting to deliver. Persian infantry advanced through the pass while the Immortals descended from the hills behind the Greeks. The trap was complete. Leonidas made one final tactical decision. Rather than waiting behind the defensive wall to be surrounded, he ordered his men to advance into the wider section of the pass. If death was inevitable, they would meet it while attacking. The Greeks surged forward with astonishing determination. For a brief moment, the Persian advance stalled once again. Ancient historians record that the fighting became more savage than at any previous point during the battle. Spears shattered under repeated impacts. Warriors drew short swords once their primary weapons broke. When even those failed, men fought with broken spear shafts, knives, stones, and bare hands. Herodotus describes a struggle that gradually ceased to resemble an organized battle. It became a desperate fight for survival. Some ancient accounts report that two brothers of Xerxes died during this furious fighting, although modern historians debate certain details. What remains clear is that Persian casualties continued mounting despite overwhelming numerical superiority. Somewhere amid the chaos, Leonidas fell. Exactly how he died remains uncertain. Ancient sources differ, but most agree that he was struck during the intense fighting near the front of the Greek line. The death of their king did not break Spartan resolve, it hardened it. The Greeks launched repeated counterattacks to recover Leonidas' body. Again and again they drove into the Persian ranks. Again and again they carried him back. Protecting the body of a fallen king held profound cultural importance in Greek society. Leaving him in enemy hands would have been considered an unbearable disgrace. Eventually, however, sheer numbers prevailed. Forced back toward a small hill behind the ruined wall, the remaining Spartans and Thespians formed one final defensive position. Persian soldiers surrounded them from every direction. There would be no escape. Xerxes ordered his archers forward. Thousands of arrows filled the sky. Ancient writers later claimed that Persian arrows were so numerous they blocked out the sun. Whether literally true or not, the image captured the overwhelming scale of the assault. The defenders disappeared beneath a storm of missiles. When the arrows finally ceased, the hill had fallen silent. The Battle of Thermopylae was over. From a purely military perspective, Persia had won. The pass lay open. The road into southern Greece belonged to Xerxes. Athens would soon be evacuated, occupied, and burned. Yet history rarely measures victory. Only by territory captured. The stand at Thermopylae accomplished exactly what Leonidas had hoped. The Greek fleet continued fighting at Artemisium before withdrawing in good order. Athens gained precious time to evacuate much of its civilian population across the sea to Salamis. The story of Leonidas' sacrifice spread rapidly throughout Greece, strengthening resistance instead of destroying it. Cities that had hesitated now reconsidered. If a few thousand men could delay the greatest empire on earth for several days, perhaps Persia was not invincible after all. Only weeks later, Greek naval commander Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into the narrow waters of Salamis. There, just as Leonidas had used geography at Thermopylae, the Greeks transformed confined space into a decisive advantage. The Persian fleet suffered a devastating defeat. The following year, united Greek forces achieved another major victory at Plataea, effectively ending Xerxes' invasion. Thermopylae did not save Greece by itself. It gave Greece something equally important: time, hope, and proof that courage, discipline, and intelligent leadership could challenge even the mightiest empire. Centuries later, visitors still travel to the site where Leonidas and his companions made their stand. The coastline has shifted dramatically since antiquity, and the narrow pass has become a broad plain through centuries of sediment carried by nearby rivers. Yet one reminder remains: carved into stone are words inspired by the poet Simonides, composed shortly after the battle. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. More than 2,500 years have passed since those words were written. Empires have risen and disappeared. Kings have been forgotten, entire civilizations have vanished beneath history. Yet the story of Thermopylae continues to endure, not because the defenders won the battle, but because they transformed defeat into one of the most enduring examples of courage, sacrifice, and determination the world has ever remembered.